The hailstones came down like bullets from heaven, each one the size of a walnut, and Beatrice Lawson ran through them anyway, because dying on the road seemed preferable to dying alone in that broken-down stagecoach 3 miles back. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow where ice had split the skin, and her dress clung to her body like a second skin, soaked through and heavy. But she kept running because she had seen the light in the distance, and light meant shelter and shelter meant survival. The storm had come out of nowhere on this April evening in 1878, transforming the New Mexico territory from sun-baked earth to a frozen hellscape in minutes. And now, all she could do was focus on putting one foot in front of the other while the sky pelted her with its fury. Her boots squelched in the mud that had formed instantly when the hail began melting on contact with the still warm ground. She had been traveling from Kansas City to meet her aunt in Santa Fe, the only living relative who had offered to take her in after her parents died of fever last winter. The stagecoach driver had assured her they would make it before nightfall, but then the axle broke on a rut in the road, and he had ridden off on one of the horses to get help, telling her to stay put. But staying put meant freezing, and Beatrice had never been good at doing what she was told when her instincts screamed otherwise. The light grew closer, resolving itself into the warm glow of windows in a ranch house that sat solid and real against the darkening sky. Her lungs burned with the effort of running, her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she pushed forward because she could see the porch now, could make out the solid wooden door that promised warmth and safety. A particularly large hailstone struck her shoulder hard enough to make her cry out, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Her hand reached for the porch railing just as her legs finally gave out, and she crashed against the wooden steps with a gasp of pain and relief mixed together. She dragged herself up, fingers numb and clumsy, and managed to lift her fist to pound against the door. The sound seemed pathetically weak against the roar of the storm, but she hit the wood again and again, desperate and scared and so cold that her teeth chattered violently enough to bite her tongue. The door swung open just as she pitched forward, and strong arms caught her before she could collapse onto the floor. She found herself staring up into a face that seemed carved from the same rugged stone as the New Mexico landscape, all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of dark amber that widened in shock at the sight of her. "Jesus Christ," the man breathed, and then he was pulling her inside, kicking the door shut behind them with his boot. The sudden absence of wind and hail felt like a physical embrace, and Beatrice sagged in his arms, shaking uncontrollably. "You are half frozen. What in God's name were you doing out there?" "Stagecoach," she managed through chattering teeth. "B broke down, driver left, had to find shelter." He did not waste time with more questions. Instead, he swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing and carried her across the room to set her down in a chair near the fireplace. The heat from the flames felt like needles against her frozen skin, painful and wonderful at the same time. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick wool blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You will catch your death otherwise. I will turn my back, and there is a spare room through that door where you can change. I will bring you something dry to wear." Beatrice nodded, still shaking too hard to manage words. He was true to his word, turning to face the wall while she struggled to her feet and stumbled toward the room he had indicated. Her fingers were so numb that the buttons on her dress might as well have been impossible puzzles, but eventually she managed to peel the sodden fabric away from her skin. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a simple wooden dresser, A knock on the door made her jump. "I am leaving some clothes outside the door," the man called. "They will be too large, but they are dry and warm." "Thank you," she called back, wrapping the blanket more tightly around herself. She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat before cracking the door open and grabbing the pile of clothing he had left. The shirt was indeed enormous, hanging past her knees like a dress, and she had to roll the sleeves of the wool undershirt up several times before her hands emerged. The pants were impossible, so she simply wrapped herself in the shirt and the blanket and made her way back to the main room. The man had his back to her, stirring something in a pot that hung over the fire. The smell of coffee and something savory made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. He turned when he heard her approach, and she got her first real look at him in the firelight. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and a jaw covered in stubble that suggested he had not shaved in a few days. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn flannel shirt, and his hands looked strong and capable as they held the ladle. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair. "You need something hot inside you." Beatrice sank into the chair gratefully, and he handed her a tin cup filled with coffee so hot that steam rose from it in wisps. She wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers, and took a careful sip. It was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. "You saved my life. I am Beatrice Lawson." "Quinn Quillen," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "This is my ranch about 5 miles outside Santa Fe. You said your stagecoach broke down." "The axle snapped," Beatrice explained. "The driver rode off to get help, but the storm came so quickly. I saw your light and just started running. I did not know what else to do." Quinn nodded slowly, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must look, with her hair hanging in wet tangles and a bruise already forming where the hail had struck her. "You made the right choice. That storm would have killed you for certain if you had stayed out in it. Though I have to say, I have lived in this territory for 10 years, and I have never seen hail like that in April." "Is it over?" Beatrice asked, suddenly realizing that she could no longer hear the roar of ice against the roof. "Seems to be," Quinn said, rising to look out the window. "Sky is clearing. These spring storms come fast and leave fast. Your driver will probably be back at the coach by now, wondering where you went." "I left a note," Beatrice said quickly. "I told him I was heading toward the light I saw. He will know to look for me here, will he not?" Quinn turned back to her, and something in his expression softened. "Most likely. But even if he does not, I will take you into Santa Fe myself in the morning. You cannot be out here alone." He paused, then added, "You said you were heading to Santa Fe. You have family there." "My aunt," Beatrice replied. "Mrs. Margaret Lawson. She runs a boarding house on Water Street. Do you know it?" Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, recognition perhaps. "I know of it. Your aunt has a good reputation. She is a kind woman." He ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to her. "Eat. You need your strength." The soup was simple but good, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef that melted on her tongue. Beatrice ate slowly, aware of Quinn watching her but not in a way that made her uncomfortable. There was something solid about him, something steady and reliable that made her feel safe despite the strangeness of the situation. She was alone in a stranger's house, wearing his clothes, and yet she felt no fear. Perhaps it was simply relief at being alive, or perhaps it was something about the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that suggested he was a man who kept his word. "How long have you had this ranch?" she asked, setting the empty bowl aside. 6 years, Quinn replied. "I came out here after the war, looking for a fresh start. Bought the land cheap because the previous owner died without heirs, and I have been building it up ever since. I raise cattle mostly, some horses. It is a hard life, but it is mine. You live here alone." The question slipped out before Beatrice could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize, that was forward of me." "It is a fair question," Quinn said, a hint of amusement touching his lips. "Yes, I live alone. Had a partner for a while, but he moved back east when his wife got sick. Could not blame him. This land is not for everyone." He poured himself a cup of coffee and settled back in his chair. "What about you, Miss Lawson? What brings you all the way to New Mexico?" Beatrice wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself, the familiar ache of grief settling in her chest. "My parents died this winter. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had no other family in Kansas City, and my aunt wrote to offer me a place with her. So I sold what little we had and bought passage on the stage." "I am sorry," Quinn said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made tears prick at her eyes. "Losing family is never easy, but your aunt will be glad to have you, I am sure of that. Margaret Lawson is good people." They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Outside, the last of the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing stars that glittered like diamonds against the black velvet of the night sky. Beatrice felt exhaustion pulling at her, the warmth of the fire and the food in her belly combining to make her eyelids heavy. "You should sleep," Quinn said, as though reading her mind. "You can have the bed in the spare room. I will sleep out here and keep the fire going." "I cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested weakly. "You can and you will," Quinn replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You have been through enough today. Get some rest and we will sort everything out in the morning." Beatrice was too tired to argue further. She rose on shaky legs and made her way back to the small room, closing the door behind her. The bed was narrow but comfortable, and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. She burrowed beneath it, still wrapped in Quinn's shirt and the blanket, and let her eyes drift closed. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the sound of Quinn moving quietly in the main room, stoking the fire and settling in for the night. She woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, Beatrice could not remember where she was, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up slowly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Every part of her body ached, as though she had been beaten, and when she touched her forehead, she felt the raised welt where the hail had struck her. Rising carefully, she made her way to the main room. Quinn stood at the stove, his back to her, and she took a moment to observe him in the morning light. He had shaved and changed his shirt, and his dark hair was still damp as though he had washed at the pump outside. There was something appealing about the easy way he moved, the competence in his every gesture. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Quinn turned, and his face broke into a smile that transformed his stern features into something almost boyish. "Good morning. I was beginning to think you might sleep all day. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Beatrice admitted. "But alive, thanks to you." "Sit," Quinn said, gesturing to the table he had set with 2 plates. "I made breakfast, nothing fancy, just bacon and eggs and biscuits, but it will stick to your ribs." Beatrice settled at the table, suddenly ravenous. Quinn served her a generous portion and sat down across from her, his long legs stretched out beneath the table. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "I rode out at first light to check the road," he said. "Found your stagecoach still sitting there with the broken axle. No sign of your driver, but I left a note saying you were safe and would be in Santa Fe by this afternoon." "Thank you," Beatrice said. "I hate to be any more trouble, but I would be grateful for the ride." "No trouble at all," Quinn replied. "I need to go into town anyway for supplies. Your trunk was still on the coach, so I loaded it into my wagon. Everything else looked intact, just needed the new axle that your driver presumably went to fetch." Relief flooded through Beatrice. Her trunk contained everything she owned in the world, meager as that was. "I do not know how to thank you adequately, Mr. Quillen. You have been extraordinarily kind." "Call me Quinn," he said, "and there is no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." Beatrice doubted that very much. She had met plenty of men who would have taken advantage of a woman alone and vulnerable, but Quinn had been nothing but a gentleman. "Still," she said softly, "I am grateful." They finished breakfast, and Quinn showed her to the pump outside where she could wash. The water was cold and bracing, but it felt good to scrub the grime from her skin and work her fingers through her tangled hair. Quinn had thought to retrieve her belongings from the coach, and she changed into one of her own dresses, a simple blue calico that had seen better days but was at least clean and dry. By the time she emerged from the spare room, Quinn had the wagon hitched and ready. It was a sturdy vehicle, well maintained, with 2 strong horses in the traces. He helped her up onto the bench seat with a hand that was warm and steady, and then he climbed up beside her and set the horses moving with a click of his tongue. The morning was beautiful, all the violence of the previous night's storm washed away by the clear blue sky. The road to Santa Fe wound through rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of juniper trees. In the distance, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warmth of the spring day. "It is beautiful here," Beatrice said, drinking in the landscape. "So different from Kansas." "It gets in your blood," Quinn agreed. "The land out here, it is harsh and unforgiving, but there is something about it that makes you feel alive. I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." "Do you miss it?" Beatrice asked. "The East, I mean. You said you came here after the war." Quinn was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "Sometimes," he said finally. "I miss the green, the way everything grows so easily, but I do not miss the crowds or the noise or the feeling that you are always surrounded by other people's opinions about how you should live your life. Out here a man can be himself. Or a woman," Beatrice said softly. Quinn glanced at her, something thoughtful in his expression. "Yes," he said, "or a woman." They rode in silence for a while, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Beatrice found herself acutely aware of Quinn's presence beside her, the solid warmth of his body, and the easy confidence with which he handled the horses. She studied his profile when she thought he was not looking, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, as though he smiled more than his serious demeanor suggested. "May I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Of course. Why do you live alone?" She felt the words tumble out before she could stop them. "I mean, you seem like a good man. I would think women would be lining up to marry a rancher with his own land." Quinn laughed, a genuine sound that made something warm unfurl in Beatrice's chest. "You give me too much credit, Miss Lawson. The truth is, I suppose I have been too busy building the ranch to think much about marriage, and the few women I have met in Santa Fe, well, they did not seem interested in a life of hard work and isolation." He paused, then added, "What about you? No young man waiting for you back in Kansas City?" "No," Beatrice said, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. "My parents needed me, especially after my father got sick. There was no time for courting or thinking about marriage, and now, well, I suppose I am starting over completely." "Nothing wrong with a fresh start," Quinn said. "Sometimes it is exactly what a person needs." Santa Fe appeared on the horizon, a sprawl of adobe buildings that seemed to grow organically from the red earth. The town was larger than Beatrice had expected, with a central plaza surrounded by shops and homes, and streets that branched off in all directions. Quinn guided the wagon through the traffic with practiced ease, nodding to people who called out greetings as they passed. "You are well known here," Beatrice observed. "Small town," Quinn replied. "Everyone knows everyone for better or worse. Your aunt's boarding house is just up here." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a 2-story adobe building with a wooden sign that read Lawson House in neat black letters. The front door opened before they could even climb down, and a woman emerged who could only be Aunt Margaret. She was tall and sturdy, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes the same shade of blue as Beatrice's own. "Beatrice," she called, hurrying down the steps. "Is that you? Oh, thank heavens, I have been beside myself with worry." The stage was supposed to arrive yesterday, and when it did not, I feared the worst. Beatrice climbed down from the wagon and found herself enveloped in a fierce embrace that smelled of flower and rosewater. "I am so sorry, Aunt Margaret. The stage broke down and there was a storm, but Mr. Quillen here saved me. I would not have made it without him." Margaret pulled back, her sharp eyes moving from Beatrice to Quinn and back again. "Quinn Quillen," she said warmly. "I should have known you would be involved. You always did have a knack for being in the right place at the right time." She turned to Quinn and clasped his hand in both of hers. "Thank you for taking care of my niece. I am in your debt." "No debt, Mrs. Lawson," Quinn said, touching the brim of his hat. "I am just glad I was able to help." "Miss Lawson is a brave woman. She walked through a hailstorm to reach my door." "Come inside, both of you," Margaret commanded. "I will make tea and you can tell me everything." They followed Margaret into the boarding house, which was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread baking. Margaret bustled about, setting the kettle to boil and arranging cookies on a plate while Beatrice and Quinn settled at the large kitchen table. Over tea, Beatrice recounted the events of the previous night, with Quinn adding details here and there. Margaret listened intently, her expression shifting from worry to relief, to something that looked almost like calculation as she watched the two of them together. "You have had quite an adventure," she said when they finished, "and I cannot thank you enough, Quinn, for your kindness. You must let me pay you for your trouble." "Absolutely not," Quinn said firmly. "I did what anyone would do. Besides, it was my pleasure to help Miss Lawson." "At least stay for lunch," Margaret insisted. "I have a pot of stew on and there is plenty to go around. I will not take no for an answer." Quinn hesitated, and Beatrice found herself hoping he would agree. The thought of him leaving and perhaps never seeing him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "I would be honored," Quinn said finally, and Beatrice felt relief wash over her. Lunch was a lively affair, with Margaret plying them both with generous portions of beef stew and fresh bread, while she caught Beatrice up on family news and asked Quinn about his ranch. Several of the boarding house residents wandered through, and Margaret introduced Beatrice to each one. There was Mr. Chen, who ran a laundry service, Miss Patricia, a school teacher from Boston, and the Reverend Thomas, who ministered to the small Presbyterian congregation in town. Throughout it all, Beatrice found her attention drawn back to Quinn again and again. She noticed the way he listened when people spoke, really listened, and the way his rare smiles seemed to light up his entire face. She noticed the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, and the courteous way he treated everyone, from her aunt to the shy Chinese laundry man. When lunch was finished and Quinn rose to leave, Beatrice walked him to the door. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she realized with a start that less than 24 hours ago she had been running through a hailstorm, terrified and alone. Now she stood in the doorway of her new home, safe and warm, all because of the man standing before her. "Thank you again," she said softly, For everything. Quinn settled his hat on his head and gave her a smile that made her heart skip. "You are very welcome, Miss Lawson. I hope you will be happy here in Santa Fe. Will I see you again?" The question escaped before Beatrice could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, you said you come to town for supplies sometimes." "I do," Quinn agreed, and there was something warm in his eyes that gave her hope. "In fact, I come to town every Saturday for supplies and to pick up my mail. Perhaps we might run into each other." "Perhaps," Beatrice said, unable to keep the smile from her face. She watched from the doorway as Quinn climbed into his wagon and set the horses moving. He looked back once and raised his hand in farewell, and Beatrice waved back, aware of her aunt watching from the window with an expression that was far too knowing. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Beatrice settled into her new life. Margaret's boarding house was always busy, with residents coming and going and meals to prepare and rooms to clean. Beatrice threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction, but she found her thoughts wandering to Quinn more often than she cared to admit. Saturday arrived bright and clear, and Beatrice took extra care with her appearance, brushing her hair until it shone and choosing her best dress, a green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Margaret said nothing, but the little smile that played around her lips suggested she knew exactly why Beatrice was fussing. "I need some things from the general store," Margaret said casually over breakfast. "Would you mind going for me, Beatrice?" "I would go myself, but my knees are bothering me today." Beatrice suspected her aunt's knees were just fine, but she accepted the list gratefully and set out into the sunny morning. The general store was on the plaza, a rambling building that seemed to stock everything from nails to dress fabric to penny candy. She was examining a bolt of blue calico when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miss Lawson, what a pleasant surprise." Beatrice turned to find Quinn standing there, his hat in his hands and a smile on his face that made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Quillen, I mean Quinn, how nice to see you. Are you settling in well?" he asked, moving to stand beside her at the fabric counter. "Very well, thank you. My aunt has been wonderful and everyone at the boarding house has been so welcoming." She gestured to the list in her hand. "I am just running some errands for her." "May I walk with you?" Quinn asked. "I have a few stops to make myself." "I would like that," Beatrice said and meant it. They left the general store together, walking side by side through the busy plaza. The town was alive with activity, merchants calling out their wares and children playing in the dusty street while their mothers gossiped in the shade. Quinn pointed out landmarks and introduced Beatrice to people they passed, and she found herself relaxing in his presence, enjoying the easy conversation and the way he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. "There is a church social next week," Quinn said as they stopped outside the post office. "A dance and dinner to raise money for the new schoolhouse. I was wondering if you might like to go. With me, I mean." Beatrice felt her heart soar. "I would love to." "Good," Quinn said, and his smile was like sunshine. "I will call for you next Saturday evening if that suits you." "It suits me very well," Beatrice replied. They parted ways after that, but Beatrice felt as though she were walking on air as she finished her errands and made her way back to the boarding house. Margaret took one look at her face and laughed. "I see you ran into Quinn Quillen," she said knowingly. "He asked me to the church social," Beatrice admitted, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "That man has needed a good woman in his life for years," Margaret said firmly. "And you, my dear niece, deserve some happiness after all you have been through." I think this might work out very nicely indeed. The week that followed was the longest of Beatrice's life. She helped her aunt with the boarding house, learning the rhythms of the household and getting to know the residents better. Miss Patricia, the schoolteacher, became a particular friend, and she helped Beatrice alter one of her mother's old dresses for the social. A deep blue silk that had been too fine for everyday wear, but was perfect for a special occasion. Saturday evening arrived at last, and Beatrice was ready an hour before Quinn was due to arrive. She paced the parlor nervously while Margaret watched with amusement from her chair by the window. "You will wear a hole in the floor," Margaret said mildly. "Sit down and try to relax." "I cannot," Beatrice confessed. "What if I step on his feet when we dance? What if I say something foolish?" "Then he will laugh and think you are charming," Margaret replied. "Quinn is a good man, Beatrice. He would not have asked you if he did not genuinely want to spend time with you." A knock at the door sent Beatrice's heart racing. She took a deep breath and opened it to find Quinn standing there, looking almost uncomfortable in a clean white shirt and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Beatrice's nerves settle. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." Quinn helped her into the wagon, and they set off through the twilight toward the church. The social was being held in the yard behind the building, with lanterns strung between the trees and long tables laden with food. A group of musicians had set up on a makeshift stage, and the sound of fiddle music filled the air. "This is wonderful," Beatrice said, taking in the scene with delight. "Wait until you taste Mrs. Martinez's tamales," Quinn said. "They are the best in the territory." They filled their plates and found seats at one of the long tables, joining other townspeople who greeted them warmly. Beatrice found herself drawn into conversation with the other women, who peppered her with friendly questions about her journey from Kansas and her plans for the future. Quinn sat beside her, occasionally adding a comment but mostly just watching her with an expression that made her feel warm all over. When the dancing started, Quinn led her to the cleared area that served as a dance floor. He was not a particularly graceful dancer, but he was solid and steady, and Beatrice found herself relaxing in his arms as they moved to the music. Other couples swirled around them, but she was only aware of Quinn, of his hand warm on her waist and his amber eyes looking down at her with something that might have been wonder. "I am glad you came to Santa Fe," he said quietly as they swayed to a slower song. "So am I," Beatrice replied. "Though I never imagined my arrival would be quite so dramatic." "I keep thinking about that," Quinn said. "About you running through that storm so determined to survive. You are a remarkable woman, Beatrice Lawson." "I did what I had to do," Beatrice said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Quinn said firmly. "Not everyone. Some people would have given up, but you kept fighting. That takes courage." They danced until the musicians took a break, and then Quinn led her away from the crowd to a quieter corner of the yard where they could talk without shouting over the noise. The night air was cool and sweet, scented with the smell of the food and the wild sage that grew on the hillsides. "May I be honest with you about something?" Quinn asked, his expression serious in the lantern light. "Of course," Beatrice replied, her heart beating faster. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that night," he said. "I know we have only just met, and perhaps it is too soon to say such things, but I find myself drawn to you in a way I have never experienced before. You are brave and kind and beautiful, and I would very much like the chance to court you properly, if you would allow it." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "I have been thinking about you too, more than I probably should admit." Quinn reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Then we are in agreement. I will come calling on you properly, with your aunt's permission, and we will see where this leads." "I think I already know where it will lead," Beatrice said, surprised by her own boldness. "I think I have known since you opened that door and caught me when I fell." Quinn smiled, that rare, transforming smile that made him look years younger. "I think I have known too," he admitted. "But let us do this right. You deserve to be courted properly, not rushed into anything." They returned to the social hand in hand, and if anyone noticed, they were too polite to comment. Margaret, however, gave Beatrice a knowing look when Quinn brought her home later that evening, walking her to the door like a proper gentleman and bidding her good night with a promise to call on her the following week. True to his word, Quinn arrived the next Saturday afternoon, freshly shaved and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had obviously picked himself. Margaret invited him in for tea, and then discreetly left them alone in the parlor, though Beatrice suspected her aunt was listening from the kitchen. "I brought you something," Quinn said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box carved with an intricate pattern of vines and flowers. "I made it myself. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something to remind you of that night when you were brave enough to walk through a hailstorm." Beatrice opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a small stone, smooth and round and shot through with veins of crystal. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I found it on my property years ago," Quinn explained. "I have been carrying it around ever since, waiting for the right person to give it to. I think that person is you." "I will treasure it always," Beatrice said, and meant it with all her heart. Their courtship unfolded slowly over the weeks that followed, a careful dance of getting to know each other. Quinn came to town every Saturday without fail, sometimes taking Beatrice for walks around the plaza, sometimes sitting with her in the parlor while they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about his life before the war, growing up on a farm in Ohio with 3 sisters and a brother. He spoke of the war itself only briefly, saying it was not something he liked to dwell on, but she could see the shadows in his eyes and knew it had marked him deeply. In turn, Beatrice shared her own stories, memories of her parents and her childhood in Kansas City. She spoke of her father's bookshop and the way her mother had loved to sing while she worked. She told Quinn about the fear and grief of watching them die, helpless to save them, and the way he listened, really listened, helped heal something inside her that she had not realized was broken. Margaret watched their courtship with approval, occasionally offering gentle advice, but mostly leaving them to navigate their growing feelings on their own. The other residents of the boarding house became invested in the romance as well. Miss Patricia sighing happily whenever Quinn arrived, and the Reverend Thomas offering quiet words of encouragement. Summer arrived in full force, turning the New Mexico landscape into a study in browns and golds under the relentless sun. Quinn invited Beatrice to visit his ranch, and she accepted eagerly, curious to see the place he had built with his own hands. Margaret agreed to accompany them as a chaperone, though her presence was more symbolic than restrictive, and they set out early one Sunday morning when the air was still relatively cool. The ranch was beautiful in its stark simplicity. The house was larger than Beatrice had remembered from that frantic night, a solid adobe structure with a wide porch and windows that looked out over rolling pastureland, where cattle grazed peacefully. Quinn showed them around with obvious pride, pointing out the barn he had built himself and the corral where he trained horses. "It is wonderful," Beatrice said honestly. "You have built something real here, Quinn, something lasting." "It is missing something, though," Quinn said quietly, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It is missing someone to share it with." Margaret, with the instincts of a woman who understood the importance of giving young people space, announced that she needed to rest in the shade and shooed them away to explore on their own. Quinn took Beatrice's hand and led her up a gentle rise behind the house to a spot where they could see for miles in every direction. "This is my favorite place on the whole property," he said. "I come up here when I need to think. The view helps put things in perspective." "I can see why," Beatrice replied, drinking in the vast expanse of sky and land. "It makes you feel small, but in a good way, like your problems are not as big as they seem." "Beatrice," Quinn said, turning to face her, "I know it has only been a few months since we met, but I need you to know how I feel. I love you. I think I started loving you the moment I opened that door and saw you standing there, determined and fierce and refusing to give up. You have brought light and joy into my life in a way I never thought possible, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too much, but I do. I love you, Quinn Quillen, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Quinn pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the vast silence of the land around them. "I want to marry you," Quinn said finally. "If you will have me. I know I do not have much to offer except a ranch that requires constant work and a life that will not be easy. But I promise you this, I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. You will never doubt that you are cherished." "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, and I do not need easy, I just need you." Quinn kissed her then, a sweet, gentle kiss that held the promise of all the days to come. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling through tears. "We should go tell your aunt," Quinn said, laughing shakily. "She will want to start planning immediately." He was right. Margaret's eyes filled with tears when they told her, and she pulled them both into a fierce embrace. "I knew it," she said happily. "From the moment I saw you two together, I knew this was meant to be. We have to plan a proper wedding, of course. Nothing too fancy, but something nice." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small Presbyterian church, with the Reverend Thomas officiating. Margaret had thrown herself into the preparations with enthusiasm, enlisting Miss Patricia and the other boarding house residents to help. Beatrice wore a dress made from the blue silk she and Patricia had worked on, altered now to fit as a wedding gown, with a crown of wildflowers in her hair that Quinn had picked that morning. The church was packed with people from the town who had come to know and love them both. Mr. Chen gave Beatrice away, having appointed himself a sort of honorary uncle, and Miss Patricia stood up with her as a witness. Quinn's former partner had made the journey from back east to serve as his best man, and the look on Quinn's face when he saw Beatrice walking down the aisle made her heart feel like it might burst. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the congregation. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed half of Santa Fe. There was music and dancing, and speeches that ranged from touching to hilarious. Margaret cried openly, and even Mr. Chen had to dab at his eyes with his handkerchief. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Quinn and Beatrice slipped away from the party. They rode out to the ranch in the wagon, wrapped in a comfortable silence that spoke of contentment and anticipation. The house was waiting for them, the windows glowing with lamplight that Quinn had set up earlier. He carried her over the threshold, and Beatrice laughed with pure joy as he set her down gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quillen," he said softly. "Home," Beatrice repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, this is home." Their first year of marriage was everything Beatrice had hoped for and more. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to help Quinn with the morning chores and falling into bed exhausted but satisfied at the end of each day. The work was hard. There was no denying that, but it was also deeply fulfilling in a way her old life in Kansas City had never been. She learned to ride, at first timidly and then with growing confidence, until she could gallop across the pastures with her hair streaming behind her and laughter bubbling up from her chest. She learned to rope and brand cattle, to mend fences and tend to sick animals. Quinn was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes but gently correcting them and praising her successes. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains while they talked about their day and made plans for the future. Quinn wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy some more land to the north where there was good grazing. Beatrice dreamed of building a larger house someday, one with enough rooms for the children she hoped they would have. Margaret visited often, always bringing food and news from town. She had essentially adopted Quinn as the nephew she had never had, and the affection between them was genuine and deep. Sometimes Miss Patricia came along, and the four of them would spend pleasant afternoons playing cards or simply enjoying each other's company. Winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that transformed the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Beatrice discovered she loved the winter, the way the world seemed to slow down and turn inward. They spent long evenings by the fire, Quinn reading aloud from books they borrowed from the small town library, while Beatrice worked on her sewing or knitting. It was during one of these peaceful evenings, in early March of 1879, that Beatrice realized she was carrying their first child. She knew even before the doctor confirmed it, could feel the difference in her body and the strange, fluttering sensation low in her belly. She told Quinn at dinner one night, simply and directly, and watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Quinn replied. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You have given me so much, Beatrice. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Beatrice found the summer heat oppressive in a way it had not been the year before. Quinn hovered over her constantly, worried and protective, until she had to gently remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly capable of managing. Margaret came to stay with them a month before the baby was due, setting up in the spare room and taking over most of the household duties while Beatrice rested and prepared for the birth. Miss Patricia visited when she could, bringing tiny garments she had sewn and offering advice based on her experience with her various nieces and nephews back east. The baby arrived on a cool October evening, coming into the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father and blue eyes that Beatrice hoped would stay that color. They named him Samuel, after Quinn's father, and Quinn held his son with a reverence that made Beatrice's heart overflow with love. "He is beautiful," Quinn whispered, staring down at the tiny face with wonder. "He is perfect." "He has your stubbornness already," Beatrice said with a tired laugh, watching as Samuel tried to fit his entire fist into his mouth. "I could tell during the labor." The first few months with Samuel were exhausting but wonderful. Beatrice discovered depths of love she had not known existed, fierce and protective, and all-consuming. Quinn was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with a fussy baby and changing diapers without complaint. They were both operating on little sleep, but neither of them minded. The ranch continued to prosper under Quinn's careful management. He hired a young man named Jack to help with the heavier work, freeing up more time for him to spend with his growing family. By the time Samuel turned 1, Beatrice was pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Emma after Beatrice's mother. Emma was followed 2 years later by another son, David, and then 2 years after that by twin girls, Rose and Lily. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt almost too small, full of noise and laughter and the constant motion of children. Quinn built an addition, adding 3 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen where Beatrice spent her days cooking for their growing brood. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, splitting her time between the boarding house in Santa Fe and the ranch. She adored her great-nieces and great-nephews, spoiling them shamelessly and filling their heads with stories from her own youth. The children loved her in return, running to greet her whenever she arrived with squeals of delight. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around the ranch with dogged determination. Emma proved to have her mother's quick mind and love of books, and Quinn built her a small desk in the corner of the main room where she could do her studies. David was the quiet one, preferring to spend his time with the animals, and he showed a natural gift for healing that led the town doctor to take him on as an apprentice when he turned 16. Rose and Lily were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a language that seemed to exist only between the two of them. They were mischievous and full of energy, keeping Beatrice on her toes and making Quinn laugh with their antics. Through it all, through the sleepless nights and childhood illnesses, through droughts and hard winters and all the challenges that came with raising a family on the frontier, Beatrice and Quinn's love only grew stronger. They had built something real together, something lasting, and every time Beatrice looked at her husband across a crowded dinner table full of children, she remembered that night when she had walked through a hailstorm and he had opened his door just in time to catch her. One evening, when the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Quinn pulled Beatrice onto the porch to sit with him and watch the stars. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together, when they could simply be husband and wife instead of mother and father. "Do you ever think about that night?" Quinn asked, his arm around her shoulders. "The night we met, all the time," Beatrice replied, leaning into his warmth. "I think about how terrified I was and how determined and how my whole world changed the moment you opened that door." "Mine too," Quinn said softly. "I was so lonely before you came, Beatrice. I did not even realize how lonely until suddenly I was not anymore. You brought life and love and purpose to this place. You made it a home." "We made it a home," Beatrice corrected gently. "Together." "Together," Quinn agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Always together." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they had built their life on and the family they had created together, Beatrice felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. Life had not always been easy, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But she also knew that as long as she had Quinn by her side, she could face whatever came. The hailstorm that had driven her to his door that April night in 1878 had seemed like a disaster at the time, a terrifying ordeal that could have ended her life. Instead, it had given her everything she had ever wanted and more than she had dared to dream. It had given her love and purpose and a place to belong. It had given her home. Years continued to unfold like pages in a well-loved book. The children grew and flourished, each finding their own path in the world while remaining connected to the ranch and the family that had shaped them. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Quinn grew older, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his father. He married a girl from town named Sarah, and they built a house on the northern edge of the property, close enough to help but far enough to have their own space. Emma became a teacher, taking over Miss Patricia's position at the school when the older woman finally retired. She never married, claiming she was too busy shaping young minds to bother with romance, though Beatrice suspected her daughter simply had not found anyone who could match her fierce independence and brilliant mind. She lived in town during the school year and came home on weekends, always with stories about her students and plans for new books to order for the schoolhouse library. David indeed became a doctor, studying first with the town physician and then traveling to Denver for more formal training. He returned to Santa Fe to set up his own practice, and the whole family swelled with pride when the townspeople started calling him Doc Quillen. He married a quiet, gentle woman named Clara who had been one of Emma's students, and they gave Beatrice and Quinn their first grandchildren. Rose and Lily remained as close as ever, even after Rose married a cavalry officer stationed at Fort Marcy, and Lily fell in love with the son of a merchant family. They lived within walking distance of each other in Santa Fe and visited the ranch together at least once a month, their children growing up as close as cousins could be. Margaret lived to see all of Beatrice's children grown and settled, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. The whole town turned out for her funeral, and Beatrice stood between Quinn and Emma as they laid her to rest in the cemetery overlooking the mountains. It was a comfort to know that Margaret had lived long enough to see the family she had helped create flourishing and happy. The boarding house passed to Beatrice, but she found she could not bear to sell it or change it too much. Instead, she hired a manager to run it, using the income to help support the school where Emma taught and to fund a small library she established in Margaret's name. It felt right, honoring her aunt's memory by continuing her legacy of providing shelter and support to those who needed it. Quinn's hair turned gray at the temples and then fully white, but he remained as strong and capable as ever, rising each morning to work the ranch alongside Samuel and the small crew they now employed. He still made time each evening to sit with Beatrice on the porch, and they still talked about everything and nothing while the sun set behind the mountains. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house that Quinn had expanded twice more over the years was filled to bursting with children and grandchildren and a few great-grandchildren. There was food and music and dancing, and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. As Beatrice stood on the porch watching her family celebrate, feeling Quinn's hand warm in hers, she marveled at the life they had built together. 25 years since that fateful night when she had run through a hailstorm and he had opened his door. 25 years of love and laughter, of hard work and hard times, of joy beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, reading her mood as he always could. "Everything," Beatrice replied. "How far we have come, how blessed we are." "I am the blessed one," Quinn said, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a lonely cowboy with nothing to offer but a ranch and a dream. You gave me a family and a purpose and more happiness than any man deserves." "We gave each other those things," Beatrice said, turning to face him. "That is what love does. It builds and grows and creates something greater than either person could achieve alone." Samuel stood up then, calling for everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," he announced, raising his glass. "To my parents who showed all of us what true love looks like." They have weathered every storm together, literal and figurative, and come through stronger for it. They have built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just a house but a home. Here is to 25 more years. 25 more years, everyone echoed, and the sound of their voices filled Beatrice's heart to overflowing. Later, after the last guests had departed, and the children had helped clean up and gone to their own homes, Quinn and Beatrice stood together in the quiet of their bedroom. Through the window, they could see the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the same stars that had looked down on them on their wedding night and every night since. "You remember what I told you the day we got married?" Quinn asked, unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that were slower now but still steady. "You made a lot of promises that day," Beatrice replied, brushing out her hair. It was more silver than brown now, but Quinn still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding night. "I promised you would never doubt that you were cherished," Quinn said, crossing the room to take her in his arms. "Have I kept that promise?" "Every single day," Beatrice whispered, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Every single moment of every single day." They made love that night with the slow, deep tenderness of people who had spent decades learning each other's bodies and souls. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Beatrice felt the same peace and contentment she had felt on their wedding night, only deeper now, richer, like wine that had been allowed to age to perfection. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winters brought snow and the cozy warmth of fires. Springs brought new calves and the smell of sage after rain. Summers brought heat and the hard work of haying. Autumns brought the satisfaction of another successful year and preparations for the winter ahead. Through it all, Beatrice and Quinn remained each other's constant companions and greatest loves. They supported each other through the inevitable losses that came with growing older, the deaths of friends and the aches and pains that plagued aging bodies. They celebrated together when David's son decided to become a doctor like his father, and when Samuel's daughter proved to be a natural rancher. They mourned together when one of the twin grandchildren from Rose's marriage died of pneumonia, and they rejoiced together when Emma finally fell in love with a widowed professor from the Teachers' College in Santa Fe. On their 30th anniversary, Quinn surprised Beatrice with a trip to Kansas City. It was her first time back since she had left as a young woman of 22, and seeing the city where she had grown up brought a flood of memories both bitter and sweet. They visited her parents' graves and stood hand in hand in the cemetery, Quinn's presence a solid comfort as Beatrice said a prayer for the mother and father she had lost so long ago. "They would be so proud of you," Quinn said softly, "of the woman you became and the life you built." "I hope so," Beatrice replied. "I hope they can see somehow, can know that I am happy." "They know," Quinn said with certainty. "How could they not? It radiates from you like light." The trip was bittersweet but healing, a way of closing a circle that had been left open for too long. When they returned to New Mexico, to the ranch and the family and the life they had created, Beatrice felt lighter somehow, as though she had finally laid down a burden she had not fully realized she was carrying. As they grew into their 60s and then 70s, Quinn and Beatrice gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, letting Samuel and his growing family take over more of the responsibility. They moved into a smaller house Samuel built for them closer to the main house, a cozy 2-bedroom structure with a wide porch that had become their favorite place to spend their days. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren came to visit often, drawn by the stories Beatrice told of the old days and the quiet wisdom Quinn dispensed along with his homemade candy. The youngest ones would climb into their laps to hear again the story of how Grandma Beatrice had walked through a hailstorm, and Grandpa Quinn had opened the door just in time to catch her. "Tell it again," they would beg, and Beatrice would laugh and comply, adding details and embellishments that made Quinn shake his head in amusement, even though they both knew every word was true at its core. On their 40th anniversary, the family threw another celebration, this one even larger than the last. There were over 50 people in attendance, all of them connected by blood or marriage to the love story that had begun on a stormy April night in 1878. Beatrice looked around at all the faces, seeing her own features and Quinn's reflected in various combinations across 3 generations, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "We did good," Quinn whispered in her ear as they swayed to a slow song, his arms still strong enough to hold her close despite his 70 years. "We did better than good," Beatrice replied. "We created something beautiful." That night, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Quinn reached over and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious in a way that made Beatrice's heart skip. "What is it?" she asked, turning to face him. "I have been having some pain," Quinn admitted. "In my chest. David examined me last week and said my heart is not as strong as it used to be." Fear clutched at Beatrice's throat. "What does that mean? Can he treat it?" "He can make me comfortable," Quinn said gently. "But he says the wear of 70 years of hard living is catching up with me. I might have a few more years, or I might have a few more months. There is no way to know." "No," Beatrice said fiercely, gripping his hand tighter. "You are not leaving me. We have more time. We have to have more time." "I hope so," Quinn said, pulling her into his arms. "God knows I want every possible moment with you. But if the time comes, Beatrice, I need you to know that I have no regrets, not a single one. My life with you has been everything I could have hoped for and more. You made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Stop talking like this," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Stop saying goodbye." "I am not saying goodbye," Quinn assured her. "I am just saying thank you. Thank you for walking through that hailstorm. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for 40 years of the best life a man could ask for." They held each other through the night, and in the morning, Quinn insisted on getting up and going about his normal routine. He would not be an invalid, he declared, would not spend whatever time he had left in bed feeling sorry for himself. So they continued on, each day precious now in a way it had not been before, each moment together a gift to be treasured. Quinn lived for 2 more years after that conversation, years filled with quiet joy and deep contentment. His heart grew progressively weaker, but his spirit remained strong. He taught Samuel's sons the finer points of horse training and told stories to the great-grandchildren about the old days when New Mexico was still a territory, and the West was truly wild. He died on a sunny morning in October, sitting on the porch with Beatrice beside him. One moment he was talking about the cattle prices, and the next his words simply trailed off. His hand went slack in hers, and when Beatrice looked at his face she saw peace written in every line. "Quinn," she whispered, though she already knew. "Oh, my love." The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. They buried him on the rise behind the ranch house, the spot where he had proposed to Beatrice all those years ago, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. Beatrice stood at the graveside surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them connected by the love that Quinn had helped create. She did not cry during the service, though tears streamed down her face. These were not tears of regret or bitterness, but of gratitude for a life well lived and a love that had endured. In the months that followed, Beatrice found her way through grief with the help of her family. She moved back into the main house at Samuel's insistence, taking over the front bedroom that looked out over the land Quinn had loved. She spent her days helping with the great-grandchildren and working in the garden she had planted years ago, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of ranch life. One evening, almost a year after Quinn's death, Emma came to visit and found her mother sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Are you all right, Mama?" she asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I am," Beatrice said, and meant it. "I miss him every moment of every day, but I am all right." "Your father and I had 42 years together, Emma. 42 years of love and partnership and joy. Not everyone gets that. Most people never get even a fraction of what we had." "You two were special," Emma agreed. "Everyone who knew you could see it. The way you looked at each other, even after all those years, it was like you were still newlyweds." "In some ways we always were," Beatrice said with a soft smile. "Every day with your father felt new and precious. Even the hard days, even when we fought or when money was tight or when the drought threatened to destroy everything we had built. We faced it all together, and that made all the difference." "You think you will ever stop missing him?" Emma asked quietly. "No," Beatrice said simply. "And I would not want to. Missing him means he mattered, means our love was real and deep and true. I carry him with me always, in every memory and every habit and every choice I make. He is woven into the fabric of who I am." Emma took her mother's hand and squeezed it gently. "He loved you so much, Mama. We all saw it every day." "And I loved him," Beatrice said. "With everything I had, with everything I was. That is what made it all worthwhile." Beatrice lived for another 8 years after Quinn's death, long enough to see 2 more great-great-grandchildren born and to celebrate her 80th birthday surrounded by family. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still telling stories and offering advice and making sure everyone knew how much they were loved. She died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the hills. They buried her next to Quinn on that rise behind the ranch house, and the whole town turned out for the funeral of a woman who had touched so many lives with her kindness and strength. At the graveside, Samuel stood to speak about his mother, his voice thick with emotion but steady with pride. "My mother once told me that she walked through a hailstorm to reach my father's door, and he opened it just in time to catch her. That single act of courage and love set in motion everything that came after. Every person here today, every child and grandchild and great-grandchild, we all exist because of that moment. Because she was brave enough to keep running even when she was terrified. Because he was caring enough to open his door to a stranger in need." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "They built something lasting together, something that will endure long after we are all gone. They showed us what true love looks like, what true partnership means. And though we grieve their loss, we also celebrate the incredible legacy they left behind." That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet, David walked up to the rise where his parents were buried. He stood between the 2 headstones, reading the words carved into the stone. Quinn Quillen, it read. "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he opened his door and changed the world," and next to it, Beatrice Lawson Quillen. "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she walked through the storm and found her home." David smiled through his tears, thinking about all the stories he had heard over the years, all the lessons his parents had taught not through words but through the way they lived their lives. They had shown him and his siblings what it meant to build something lasting, to face challenges together, to never give up on the people you loved. The wind picked up, rustling through the grass and carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. In the distance, David could see the lights of the ranch house, warm and welcoming, filled with the family his parents had created. Filled with love and laughter and the continuation of a story that had begun on a stormy night so long ago. He turned and walked back down the hill, leaving his parents to rest together under the stars they had loved so well. Behind him, the land stretched out in all directions, beautiful and harsh and full of promise, just as it had been on that April evening in 1878, when a young woman named Beatrice ran through a hailstorm toward a light in the distance. She had walked through that storm with nothing but hope and determination, and she had found everything she never knew she was searching for: love and home and family and purpose. A life rich with meaning and joy, a love story for the ages. And somewhere beyond the stars, in whatever place souls go when their work on earth is done, Quinn and Beatrice were together still, their hands clasped and their love unending, watching over the legacy they had built and the family that carried on their memory. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's careful management, and eventually passed to his own children, who maintained the traditions their grandparents had established. The story of how Beatrice walked through a hailstorm and Quinn opened his door became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what their ancestors had built through courage and love. The small wooden box Quinn had given Beatrice on one of their early courting days, the one with the crystal-veined stone inside, became a family heirloom passed down through the generations. Each recipient heard the story of that night, of the storm and the desperate run for shelter, of the door opening just in time and the love that bloomed from that single moment of connection. Years became decades, and decades became a century, but the ranch remained solid and enduring, a testament to the love of two people who had found each other against all odds. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained at its core, and every member of the family knew which room had been Beatrice and Quinn's, knew which porch they had sat on each evening to watch the sunset. The graves on the rise became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a spot where they came to remember and reflect and feel connected to their history. Newlyweds would climb the hill on their wedding day to pay respects and ask for blessings on their own marriages. New parents would bring their babies to introduce them to the ancestors who had made everything possible. And sometimes, on spring evenings when hail suddenly appeared from nowhere, transforming the landscape into something otherworldly and strange, the family members would stand on their porches and remember. They would remember Beatrice running through the storm, desperate and determined. They would remember Quinn opening his door, catching her as she fell. They would remember that love sometimes arrives in the most unexpected ways, born from moments of crisis and courage. The story of Beatrice and Quinn became more than just family history. It became a reminder that true love is worth fighting for, that home is not a place but a person, and that sometimes the storms we run through lead us exactly where we are meant to be. Their descendants carried that lesson with them always, letting it guide their own choices and relationships, keeping alive the legacy of two people who had loved each other completely and built something beautiful from that love. And so the story ended where it began, with a storm and a door and two souls finding each other in the darkness. But it also never truly ended, because love like that does not die. It lives on in the children and grandchildren and all the generations that follow. It lives on in the land and the house and the memories that echo through the years. It lives on in every act of courage, every open door, every heart brave enough to run through the storm toward the light. Beatrice walked through hail to reach his front door. Quinn opened it just in time for her. And in that single moment, in that perfect collision of need and kindness, determination and compassion. Two lives became one and a legacy was born that would endure forever.